In this episode, I welcome Dr. Scott Vrzal. He is a California-based chiropractor who specializes in holistic solutions to pain management. And this is a wildly interesting episode. Dr. Scott, I've talked to a lot of doctors on this podcast, a lot of people specializing in health and wellness, specifically holistic approaches to health and wellness. And this is by far one of the most fascinating opportunities that I've had for a conversation. And specifically because we kick things off with a quote from Dr. V that where he says, "Pain is intended to elicit change." And that really set the tone for our conversation in the sense that we reframed what pain actually means, whether that is joint pain. Dr. V specializes in headaches as well, specifically linking where those headaches occur and the root cause of the issue. And that can be related to nutrition, blood type, stress, different patterns in our bodies. And so Dr. V's approach to pain is one that is wholly different, and where pain is an opportunity and pain is a signal that is giving us really valuable information that we can take action on. And so with this mindset, it really frames, again, the conversation and sets the tone for a massively interesting, insightful, and I think really impactful conversation that will provide really valuable, actionable takeaways for those of you that have any version of chronic pain. So many people deal with chronic low back pain, consistent headaches, be them tension headaches or migraines or otherwise. We deal with knee pain as athletes, tight hips. The list goes on. And Dr. V breaks down exactly where some of those typical chronic pain sites, where those things come from, how they're manifested in the body. So just a really, really cool conversation, a really different perspective. And for me, that's what it's all about. It's about talking to people that have different perspectives, that can provide insight, that opens up our minds, provides opportunities to look at things differently, to take some different action. And Dr. Vrzal is all about making sure that we can live a life where we feel healthy, we feel strong without having to make dramatic changes in our daily lives. So he provides some really actionable takeaways that aren't super heavy lifts. It's not dramatic changes to our diet, to our exercise regimen, to our life. He really is committed to helping people be the best versions of themselves, and that is at a fundamental and foundational level where we connected. So really excited for our audience to get a chance to listen and engage with Dr. Vrzal's expertise. He spent 3 decades developing these different modalities. Everything is research backed. And I think the primary takeaway here is that there's going to be some real opportunities to expand how we think about pain management, and what pain is actually providing for us in terms of an opportunity. So as always, sit back, enjoy the full episode here. This one is very, very dense and packed with tons of great information and takeaways. And as always, rate, subscribe, share, let us know what you think. Drop us a comment at enduranceminded.com. Love the feedback from our community. And please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Scott Vrzal. Dr. V, welcome to the show. How are you?
I am fantastic. Excited to share. And it sounds like you got a powerful group that we get to talk to.
Yeah. Fantastic audience on Endurance Minded. What you have to say is really going to resonate. I'm very, very excited to provide our listeners the opportunity to connect with you and your story. And so to that end, I'd love for you to kick us off with just your personal story. I think it's really compelling, and your journey to get to where you're at, I think is one that is that's very interesting, and I think that'd be a great springboard for us to expand our conversation. So if you could just give us what started this journey for you, and how'd you get here?
Get to know the man behind the mic, huh?
That's it.
Indeed. So, I mean, for me, like so many, it started when I was young. Initially, really watching my grandfather deteriorate. He had cancer and arthritis, and loved him and respected him tremendously. And watching him suffer kind of early on got me thinking, well, man, what do I need to do to not have to, end my life that way and end with that sort of suffering, right? And shortly after that, I was diagnosed hypoglycemic. We did back in the day, did a 6-hour glucose tolerance test, and they said, you're hypoglycemic, and this is why you're getting in trouble in school and behaving the way you're doing. And so then I realized, you mean the donut I'm eating before and after school has something to do with this? So, and then, I was starting to play at that time. Racquetball was kind of a hot, sport. So I'd eat a donut, go play racquetball, play really hard for 10 or 15 minutes. And then when the donut wore off, I'd, stand in the back and could care less. And my loving mom says, what'd you eat? Why'd you crash so hard? And so that kind of put it together for me. Hey, what I ate just affected the way I'm performing. And so at 14, I swore off sugar and literally quit eating refined sugar back then and never turned back because I recognized the cause and effect of how food was affecting me at that point. So that started my journey, and about that time I was starting to work out and interested in girls, so I wanted to look like a stud, right? And so doing
the motivator for so many of us back in the day.
Indeed. And so I got into that, started working out, and I competed in some natural bodybuilding shows. I guess it worked because I met my wife in the gym, and so she and I became Mr. and Mrs. Natural California, and so that was a lot of what was going on as I was getting into this health arena and starting to take it on as a profession. I'd had headaches early on in that journey, and a chiropractor was one that actually created some relief for me. The first step, my parents said, you have a headache. Because for me, they would come on whenever I bench press. And the harder I try to, I'm like, forget it. I'm tired of, cutting my workouts because of this. I try to work through it. And the harder I push through, the longer the headaches would last. And so typically I just try to, gut it out like so many of us do with life in general, right? It hurts, but keep pushing. We'll talk about more of that, more about that in the end as we go. But I pushed through and aspirin, Advil, Tylenol, none of the other stuff would knock it down. So, God forbid you might have an aneurysm. Let's go check, let's get you a CAT scan. And so did a CAT scan with dye and all of that. And they said, you don't have an aneurysm, so go see a psychiatrist. Thanks for nothing, right? That wasn't so helpful. So I went on a journey to figure that out, and ultimately chiropractic helped tremendously. Now, in my understanding, I recognize he adjusted C2, the second vertebra in my neck. That affects colon. That turns out colon, when the colon's dysfunctional, that will cause a headband, a whole headache. And so that's ultimately what I was having, and it would pound and throb, and again, last days on end if I tried to push through it. So I figured that out, started making dietary changes. I was into chiropractic college by that point because after I got adjusted, I made some of these changes. I realized, man, I feel great. I feel so much better. I want everybody else to enjoy this. And what can I do? How can I, as a vocation, help others to end suffering, right? The humanitarian thing. So as a bodybuilder and through chiropractic college, again, we were Mr. and Miss Natural California. I felt like I'd kind of proven myself in the anaerobic world, and we did all drug-tested bodybuilding shows. Then in physiology during chiro school, the instructor said people are either good anaerobic athletes or they're good aerobic athletes. And I have no problem admitting I'm a rebel through and through. So I had to prove, I proved myself as an anaerobic athlete, bought a mountain bike as I was graduating chiro school and got into aerobic exercise, which was a big mindset shift for me because I was an overtraining junkie on the weights. And so it was very hard for me to make mass. And so I was kind of anti-aerobic, if you will, at that point. But then as I started doing more cardiovascular exercise, I realized, man, my blood sugar is more stable. I feel so much more better, more on my game doing aerobic. And I got, more and more addicted, if you will, to, long, steady bike rides and things that would really build that aerobic engine and that base. And just kind of took it from there. I still was doing some weight training. I was judging bodybuilding shows. So I had that mental gyration of like, I need to look the part, but then it slows me down on the hills. And, what do I do? Who am I? And I kind of found that happy medium where I had to give up the idea of I wanted to be the first to the top of the hill, but I didn't want to look like him. This is a scrawny little 120 pound, climber. And so, kind of found that happy medium where I could maintain some size and some shape but mostly build the aerobic engine and implement intervals. And for this audience, this kind of talk makes sense, right? But intermixing intervals with all of that to get faster and faster. I competed at a very high level in cycling now, mostly in the endurance space. My sweet spot is the 3 to 8 hour bike races, mostly is what I'm doing. So with all that, we can go on and on into the aerobic space.
I love that. Oh man, I actually didn't know that's cool. I didn't recognize you had made that transition. Yeah, a lot of folks, and I've myself, my personal journey has been one of kind of jockeying back and forth with ultra distance activities with strength training and different things, and trying to, like you said, kind of that balance of like to spend time in the gym, but also recognize that pulls you back downhill. So you're trying to weigh that. One of the things that I was reading in your book, actually, and we can get into more detail about that, but one of the things I was reading in your book was, that you talked about, was the muscle organ nutrition correlation, and I might be off base, but just this kind of where we're talking about different modalities and how these things are linked and kind of your journey, it made me think of that, and I'd love for you to just break that down for us. Explain what that is. I think that is, I know from my own experience as I've matured as an athlete and a coach and a practitioner, and it's something that took me a while to arrive at, this recognition that there is a correlation between these things, and these things don't happen in silos. But I think that's a challenging place for a lot of people to arrive at, and that knowledge is not as readily available maybe as it should be in terms of its ability to help people. So I'd love for you just to expand on that from your perspective. What does it mean? How do we leverage it? What's been your experience with it? Take us down that path a little bit.
Yeah, awesome. That's a huge path, and the beauty. So initially, let's start with the one of my favorite lines lately is pain is intended to elicit change. So, the beauty of this muscle organ correlation is it empowers us as consumers, as athletes, as professionals, because unfortunately most of the allopathic medical sort of profession wants to take that power away from us as human beings. And you have pain, take this anti-inflammatory or this kind of stuff to block that pain, which is disserving. It's a very big disservice to us, because that pain is intended to say, look, you're eating the wrong thing, or you have this stress that you haven't addressed, and now you've got pain and dysfunction in this area. And so that's why my book is called The Headache Advantage, because all these areas, and we'll get into some of those muscle organ correlations and how they relate, but each referred pain area tells a story, tells of an organ or a gland that's not functioning appropriately. And in my world, if it's a headache, that almost tells me almost immediately what the priority is. So we've been able to whittle it down to literally 7 different patterns of headaches, and each of those patterns has a different organ association with it. And so, if a person has a list of 7 different symptoms, in my mind, I'm going, we got digestion, all these different things associated with that symptom-wise. And then they say, I have a right-sided headache. I know it's a gallbladder issue that's triggering it. And so I can pretty confidently go through as a clinician and say, we fix your gallbladder, then most of your other digestive problems, your low back pain, your knee pain, these memory loss or recall issues, those are all going to get better when we fix your gallbladder, for example. So it gives us a very nice tool to identify where we need to make change in our body and our health. And this applies to athletic performance, sciatica, or, Achilles tendonitis. One of the podcasts I was on, the podcaster had Achilles tendonitis. He was an endurance athlete, and he was he was not able to train for a couple months leading into this podcast we did. Turned out he was an O blood type, eating avocados, trying to eat good fats honorably. But for an O blood type, that avocado was suppressing his immune system, allowing a virus to flourish and create the weakness in his Achilles tendon. And so then he was having that recurring Achilles tendonitis. So all these indicators are an indicator. They're telling us, hey, make some change. So spinning back to your original question, every muscle has an associated gland or organ with it. And so that is hugely empowering if we can find the tools or find the practitioner to help us understand what that is. So I talked about the gallbladder, talk about that often because that is the most common headache, is the right-sided headache. When the gallbladder doesn't function, it's going to refer pain to the right side of the head. It's going to cause weakness of a little muscle in the back of the knee called the popliteus muscle. So then we have weakness in the knee, instability in the knee, or eventually potentially what they call a Baker's cyst, where we can get a full-blown cyst in the back of the knee. These are all signs that the gallbladder is not functioning or has not been functioning for a while. Ultimately people end up getting their gallbladder removed, or some of that if they don't appropriately address it early on. Then mentally, emotionally, because the brain's control of the gallbladder is through a chemical neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. And so when the brain's trying to tell that gallbladder, work, you lazy slug, get going, then we end up with low acetylcholine. Low acetylcholine can cause blood pressure to go up, causes memory recall issues. So that, I know your name, Taylor, just I can't quite pull it up. And that's a deficiency of acetylcholine. So oftentimes we get the gallbladder functioning better, knee gets better, the recall improves, and we move on. So and then the other part of the question, when we identify that muscle, the organ association, then it's either a structural need, a dietary need, a supplemental need, or emotional correction that's going to correct that lifestyle compromise, that weakness there.
Wow. Okay. That's no, that's incredible. I mean, so give me, I'm thinking like, you just mentioned the gallbladder, right side headache. That's connected to the knee. I'm thinking through the lens of, people that I work with, right? I'm working in the athlete space. I'm working with ultra distance athletes. And then just chronic issues as well, right? Low back pain, tight hips, right? I'm going to use quotes around these things, right? These like phrases that we typically use that someone would go and try to solve. Walk me through, what's that sound like or look like, without giving away your secret sauce? What's that look like from your perspective? I got a tight back and I'm a runner and I'm having some trouble with my knee. And then, lo and behold, I'm running a business and I got stress at work and I get headaches twice a week. We'll finish out the example. Let's say like on the left side. But yeah, I'm curious. Like, I mean, that's fascinating. Like, walk me through just this kind of what in my world is very commonplace, right? Everybody's got tight hips, knees are tight, like IT band, something like that. And then, we're trying to manage 1,000 different things. And lo and behold, I get headaches, and that's frustrating, and that's disrupting my day. What's that look like in your world? How are you approaching that with your knowledge and expertise?
Yeah. First off, I have no problem giving away the secret sauce. The world needs this.
I thought so.
Yeah. I mean, really, there's plenty of need in the world. And there's, like I said, there's only one of me. I'm training up as many practitioners in this information as I can. So anything I can do to help somebody change their life, I'm happy to do it. So secret sauce in low back pain. There's a couple, it depends on where. When we say low back pain, typically a lot of what you described is going to be digestion. The quadratus lumborum muscle that attaches from the ribs, the lower rib, to the pelvis, that muscle spazzes when the colon's not functioning properly. So typically meaning constipation in that arena, or not eliminating properly. The IT band similarly gets weak and tender when the colon's not functioning properly, so specifically that you can actually determine where in the gut the spasm is by where on the IT band the tenderness is. So,
Wow.
I mean, it's very specific. Think reflexology. When somebody's doing reflexology on the foot, they can, rub a point and, oh, this is your adrenal glands or this is your colon. I mean, the whole body's laid out that way. Iridology has the same sort of stuff. A lot of it's based on acupuncture, and that's a lot of where I was able to figure out the headache patterns is by looking at the acupuncture meridians and how those, danced around the head. So again, you talked about colon function, the IT, because of the QL, the low back, and the IT band. And then they might have the whole headache pattern that goes along with that. Then I'm thinking colon is the primary problem. Do we need to change something in the diet, which very commonly does? I mean, the standard American diet stinks. There's all those issues, right? So we need more fiber. We need more vegetables to heal and the intestine and help deliver, detoxify all the pesticides and the junk we're exposed to. So we have that role in the food realm. Then I'm a big fan of blood type because I see it work. I've changed my life, so to speak. And initially when I got exposed to the blood type diet 20 or 30 years ago, I'd say, yeah, it's just tomatoes. Who cares? It's good for the prostate. And every time I'd eat tomatoes, I'd fall asleep and drool in church, or it would cause this insulin dump. And so then every time I would try to go outside the box on, a food that was quoted as an avoid in the blood type diet, I'd end up with symptoms. And I see that with patients all day, every day. And there's some pretty typical kind of flagship foods per blood type. And where I'm going with that is the A blood type, for example, does really bad with beef. Beef will literally set up intestinal spasms and mono. So if an A blood type person eats, who's a high stress, high cortisol producer, that person eats beef, they're going to end up literally with mono-like symptoms for the next day, carb sugar cravings afterwards, and spasms in the intestine, which is going to manifest as IT band syndrome problems or low back pain. So we want to look at what the foods are in that case. For me as a clinician, I've been doing muscle testing and pain pattern demonstrating for the patient to understand what those trigger foods are, or, potentially it could be an emotional thing. Organs all have, taken it down another road, but organs all have specific emotions associated with them. Again, a lot of that goes back to acupuncture and which has been around thousands of years, way much longer than pharmacology or any of the other stuff that we've been exposed to as in our lifetime. But those organs, we're talking about the colon. So the colon has emotions like grief and sadness and yearning, compelled to neatness, these emotions that if we have the loss of a loved one, that could be the trigger that was the final straw to blow, if you will, the intestine and set up low back pain. So there's ways to kind of desensitize, get that out of their system so that doesn't continue to haunt us. To help, figure that out as a human being, if your back's been hurting ever since mom died, then, we need to clear that. We need to get rid of that trigger. If it hurts every time you eat a steak, then that's pretty obvious. And, maybe a person will have to journal or something like that to figure it out. An O blood type is going to be different. They'll, from that diet, low back pain, if the O blood type eats beef, they actually literally need it. Beef is like medicine, good quality grass-fed red meat is like medicine for the O blood type. And they're going to do good with intense physical activity. They're going to get de-stressed by that. Whereas the A is going to need to balance their training a little bit more, do more cardio, a little bit more. They're going to have to be more religious, so to speak, about balancing their training, because it's very easy for the A blood type to overtrain and crash and burn before they get to the race, the win.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. I haven't been exposed to a ton of information on the blood type side of things, although I'm aware certainly of the linkage. One of the things I want to touch on, or I'd love for you to expand on, is just you mentioned like the role of emotional well-being in chronic pain. And I think this is something that I've been really fascinated by personally as I honestly just matured as an individual. I've been an athlete, an ultra distance athlete, and for over 20 years and have also operated in high stress environments on the career front. And I've come to realize, in my life over the last many years, is like these things are absolutely linked, right? Like the stress that I bring into my emotional health is equally or more important than my physical health, and absolutely impacts how I show up and I'm able to do the things that I want to do, right? Whether that's in the career space, whether that's on the workout, whether that's my relationship with my wife, like the list goes on.
Right.
And for a long time, I will admit that I saw them very siloed. I was like, well, that's kind of one thing over here, but I can still just keep my nose to the grindstone and put my head down and train hard and work hard. And I can kind of outrun this thing, but I don't think that that's the case. And so I'd love for, again, from your experience, how are those things linked? Like, what is the role of our emotional well-being when it comes to chronic pain, and how we're thinking about chronic pain, whether it's addressing it or just, understanding the root cause?
Yeah, such a great subject. And just to throw it out, let's make sure to leave enough time to get to the effects of overtraining and the physical effects, because we're going to cover that in a different way than pretty much anybody else is going to talk about. So I'm in preventative medicine. Let's talk about how to prevent the storage of those emotions. Let's start from the good side, right? Think of, we want to be more emotionally, we want to be more rock-like than sponge-like. And so rock-like means eating our minerals, which means organic vegetables. Organic vegetables have literally thousands of times the amount of minerals in there. And so those minerals, when they alkalize us, so when we're more alkaline than we are acidic, when we have the minerals in there, then the emotions are a lot more likely to kind of, water off a duck's back, sort of paradigm, versus when we're eating the sad standard American diet that is very minerally deficient and that stuff, we're a lot more prone to store and take on all those emotions. So first step is, let's do what we can to not be so sensitive to all the junk that goes on around us, right? We don't want to take it home with us. So that's the organic vegetables, and then exercise, right? The runner's high is an elevation of dopamine. So we want dopamine give us that creativity. It kind of gives us the glass 3/4 full sort of paradigm in life, right? If we're not getting the exercise in, dopamine's lower. We're not getting that charge to keep us, focused and on task. And I mean, that's where I write a lot of my material, is while I'm exercising. I got the dopamine up and the creative juices are just going bananas. So we want to keep that going to prevent us from storing them. God forbid we don't do that properly, or we have a traumatic emotional event where the system starts to break down, then all the emotions that, start heaping on top of that. And that's where it becomes challenging as a clinician, is, somebody's got 5, 10, 20 years of this same problem that, all the emotions now get heaped on as grief and sadness and, compelled to need all these emotions associated with, as we explained earlier, a colon issue. Then we've got all that to sort through, and makes it more challenging. Whereas we want to prevent it, or, ideally get it figured out quick so that there's less garbage, less baggage to take out in the process. So prevention is always wonderful with, good quality food. Sugar is going to make us more susceptible. It's going to make us more acidic, more prone to take junk on. Toxic metals, a lot of the consequences of toxic metals are because they displace minerals. Minerals help enzymes, help us, keep trim and fit and, aerobically performing, keep our mitochondria working. So minerals are great for all that, but those get displaced if there's a bunch of pesticides in our food, or, that sort of stuff, or aluminum in our deodorant, or mercury in our teeth. All those things play a role in compromising our overall health, so that we're more emotionally sensitive to what happens in and around us.
So I'm curious about the overtraining side of things, since you mentioned it. So I can't help myself but to go down that path, because, as you well know, right, that is something that is, I've often described, or do consistently describe, coaching as pulling back on the reins, right? The primary role of an individual with a background, like myself, someone who's worked on the athlete side of things, is that we're trying to keep them from hurting themselves, right? Typically, motivation, specifically for the people that I work with, is not an issue. They're over motivated, and I'm trying to pull back. So then that leads to overtraining. So what does that look like in your world? How are we recognizing that, or how do we, from a preventative perspective, how do we catch that before it happens? I'd love to see your perspective on it.
Totally. I embody that. I mean, I've had coaches most of my, cycle racing career. I know this stuff. I know how to set up plans, but I need somebody to say, it's time to back it down, buddy. You've been going hard for 6 weeks. You're about to crash and burn. I'm like, no, I got this, right? As I'm standing on the ledge of the cliff, just about to jump. So I fully embody that, and I've been overdriven all my life. It's just the way I roll. So it's all about, and that's what training and that's what growth is, right? Is pushing ourselves to the edge of collapse without jumping off the edge, without jumping off the cliff. And so, I mean, herbs, there's an herb called astragalus that I use during race season, especially, that allows me to push it a little bit harder without crashing and burning, because astragalus is an herb that helps the adrenals. It helps us keep the immune system strong in a chronic challenge sort of season. So that's an herb that's going to be somewhat preventative, somewhat beneficial when we're really pushing the envelope. So the signs and symptoms, the physical symptoms of chronic overtraining, L5, the very lowest vertebra in the back, that central low back pain that you kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, that pain is often an early sign of adrenal fatigue. So chronic overtraining means we're chronically secreting cortisol. That's an adrenal-related hormone. Those of you that have been in the natural health arena at all probably have heard about adrenals. When they're challenged, the muscles that get weak is the sartorius and the gracilis. Those are both muscles that basically attach from the pelvis to the inside of the knee. And so most of those medial meniscus pain problems and pain in there. I had one yesterday that patient, thought they were going to have surgery, put her on an adrenal herb, and the pain was literally gone before she left the office. So, making these changes can get the big wins and immediate wins. So we've got that sartorius and gracilis that gets weak. So the medial knee, the inside of the knee, is going to get tender. The other muscles that go along with that are there's a posterior tibialis. There's muscles that support the ankle and the shin, if you will, that also get weak when the adrenals are chronically challenged. So that plantar fasciitis that is so popular right now, so common right now, plantar fasciitis at its core is an adrenal problem as well. So if we don't address that, then over time, that plantar fasciitis, the collapsing of the arch, starts setting up bunions. It starts setting up heel spurs. So bunions, heel spurs are signs of unbalanced, in this case, training or not managing stress in one's life. So we want to look at herbs or, B vitamins or dietary changes to help the adrenals function better. But then, contract with somebody that's going to say, hey, buddy, time to take a rest week, that sort of thing. And really, we want to pay attention to those signs. Another sign of overtraining is that fatigue, right? The resting heart rate is going to be up 10 beats a minute when we just finished a race, right? We just did a triathlon. We want to. Technically, you could track resting heart rate or heart rate variability to determine, okay, now I can start getting back to it, or, we need to chill out for the next 4 days while the body recovers and gets well. So having that balance allows us to get better intensity. If we have balance in life, we get better value, better intensity when we do our high intensity days. If we have the self-discipline to do the low intensity, do the aerobic base training as well. Joe Friel, kind of legend in the training space, says the bigger the base, the higher the peak. Mm-hmm. Right. So we get that good solid base, then we can train harder. We have a higher peak ultimately. And so that's the fun of training, right? Is finding that sweet spot of getting the intensity in. And it's going to be, everybody wants to, what's the ratio, or how long should I spend aerobic versus aerobic? Some of it's going to depend on blood type. Some of it's going to depend on life. If I'm chilling on the beach in Hawaii or, on a vacation, I can go hit it hard for hours and hours and hours. If I'm doing my typical running like a, chicken with his head cut off all day trying to help people, then I need to be a little bit more disciplined in keeping the aerobic base going. And then touching the intensity. For me, 2 to maybe 3 days a week of high intensity is about as much as my immune system, about as much as my body can handle. And it's going to be different for everybody. An A blood type that's under more stress is going to could only do 1 day of intervals. Whereas the O blood type, they get de-stressed by high intensity, by HIIT type training. So they could potentially tolerate more. If they're retired and they're chilling and life is good, then go to it, right? But if we're still in productive years and still smashing it, day in, day out, we got to be a little bit more disciplined.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that approach of just kind of the, even in small doses or small periods of time, that very real focus on the seasonality of things, right? That it is different than, when you're on vacation, like you said, on a beach versus day to day and managing those responsibilities. And I think I've always been a big proponent of really taking those stresses or lack thereof into consideration and recognizing, again, that these things don't happen in a vacuum, right? We have to take into account the other stresses that our body is under and recognize that it's trying to manage those. And training is one of those stressors. And so it is, it's in the mix too. And, your body only has so much capacity to get rid of stress and to manage that appropriately. And on the other side of that, like you said, is the cliff, right? And then when we are specifically in the training space, we're kind of flirting with that cliff by design anyway. And so we have to be cognizant of our proximity to it and pay attention. Just out of curiosity, and I'm sure this is, varies wildly, but like, what are some of the I'm specifically interested in the nutrition side of things. Like, what are some of the core or top few nutrition changes or tweaks that you see that make a really big impact? And that might be too broad of a question, but that's fascinating to think about. This supplement you said that you gave your patient, and then knee pain was gone. So are there themes? Like, what are a few just like, every week you see come through, it's like this food or this thing that that person makes a shift and they see these changes.
Yeah, I'm glad you went there. That's how I was going to take us there if you started to change the subject.
Great. Oh, good. We're on the same page.
100%. So stress is it physical stress? Is it chemical stress, meaning something they're eating or, doing, or is it emotional, right? We've talked a bit about the emotions and some of that. Physical stress, we talked about the overtraining. Chemical stressors, certainly, since we're talking about overtraining and basically ultimately adrenal fatigue, caffeine, unfortunately, we use it judiciously, again, depending somewhat on blood type. I hate to keep beating that up, but it makes the point that like an A blood type can tolerate caffeine a little better than an O blood type, for example. If an O blood type's, drinking especially more than 1 cup of coffee a day, and trying to push the envelope and get the energy to go work out and do that sort of stuff, that's going to put their adrenals already pretty much at threshold. And then they have a stressor in life or they overtrain. They're going to be jumping off that cliff a lot easier than somebody that's. So the alternative would be green tea. Green tea has theanine, amino acid in there that combats the negative effects of the caffeine, so they can still get a little bit of a boost. Or kombucha, for example, is another one that gives us, it's a tea with probiotics that are very good for the colon. So those are some coffee alternatives that would be good. Again, the A blood type might tolerate coffee a little bit better. O blood types can get blown out from it. Corn is another one. That's kind of a surprise food that not too many other people are talking about or aware of. But corn actually stimulates cortisol release. And for all blood types, more so in the O, but it still will do that same sort of symptoms for the A blood type. So if a person's eating too much corn, that's going to set them up for that medial inner knee pain that I was talking about, potentially plantar fasciitis. That pain will almost come on potentially even by the time they finish their corn chips, that sort of stuff. So a couple of high stressor foods is too much caffeine. Certainly sugar, makes everything worse ultimately. And I'm going to open up a whole nother subject here, but so corn and caffeine are two pretty biggies for stimulus on the adrenals and putting us already at threshold for overtraining. Another one, opening up Pandora's box, but concussions. Since we're talking to athletes, we all end up getting them, at some point. Concussions, the byproduct of neurodegeneration that happens after a concussion is glutamate. So think of, how you would feel if you were eating soy sauce or MSG all the time. That's kind of what happens post-concussion. So if a person gets, bonks their head, for me, typically it's because I'm trying to go slow to create a line for somebody less experienced behind me. And then I hit a rock that I normally would have flown over or something, land on my head. And it's like, whoa. So that causes a deficiency of enzymes. So then we get, bloating and sluggish digestion. Again, that glutamate is almost like drinking caffeine or being stimulated all the time. So those are consequences, long-term consequences of a concussion. A mineral that actually helps mitigate some of that is lithium. The Promise of Lithium it's a book out about how that affects our brain, helps us kind of chill out and protects a little bit from old concussions, or if you were concussed years ago. Often taking lithium can help mitigate that. I have a product, my buddy formulated a product through a company called Great Minds that has lion's mane with lithium that is the bomb. It works really well for these old concussions. I had a patient that flew in from Montana. She was a practitioner, and her husband was a chiropractor, very capable chiropractor. And pretty much all of her digestive symptoms had happened after she had a car crash that concussed her pretty bad, where she was unable to work for a year. And I gave her this product with the lithium and the lion's mane in it, and all her digestive issues went away, and her anxiety went away, all that stuff. So finding the core, the keystone is where the excitement comes, clinically, and for people as human in the human race.
Yeah, absolutely. Not to beat a dead horse, but I want to expand more on the stress piece, because I just am so adamant and so aware of the what it's causing, right? Like I talk to people every day, and we're trying to isolate this specific thing, right? Whether it's increased fitness, or I work a lot in the business development and leadership space and do consulting work and these things. And they're like, I'm just trying to drive at this problem, and I'm trying to outwork it, and and stress, right? People are just driving from stress, and I can see from as outside looking in, I'm like, you're never going to get there, right? Like there's all this stuff whirling around, and the stress is really the problem, right? It's the thing that's keeping you from the fitness that you want, the sleep that you want, the list goes on. And so I know we've talked about it already, but I'd love for you to just, from your perspective, help me put a fine point on what that looks like in your world, like how it's really showing up and the impact that it's having, and then how to make some sort of actionable decisions that are realistic. And I know that's a big part of what you do, is it's not these heavy lifts, these crazy life changes. It's things that are, pretty small lifts. What does it look like to really move the needle in terms of managing stress and feeling better, whether that's physically, emotionally, in whatever sector of your life we're applying this to? I'd love for you to just give us some what does that look like, and how do we change it without trying to change? We might not have any control over our job, right? That's a stressor, and maybe we're just in that position, and that's how it's going to be. So what's your take on the stress piece, just to kind of put a bow on it, so to speak?
Yeah, such a loaded subject, and it's my life's work, right? Because I am that person that's pushing to the very edge, trying to get everything I can out of this gift of life that I have. I got wife and kids, and business and employees and all that stuff that I want to be there for them, and so. Let's start with a story that helps kind of put a bow on some of this. This gal had gone to her church and complained about her husband ultimately, and they gave her biblical justification for a divorce for all that was going on, and she basically just was ranting about all the problems in her life. In her case, it came down to a type of a bug that was compromising her liver's ability to break down the stress hormones, and so what we did was give her an herb, actually in her case, myrrh, the same myrrh that was given to Jesus when he was born, right? Or taken there as a gift. So that helped her liver then break down that stress hormone. She came back 2 weeks later, gave me the biggest hug, and she's like, I love my husband again. Everything, my kids are great. Everything's well. And basically that herb, in her case, fighting off the bug that was compromising her liver's ability to break down the stress hormones, changed the whole way she saw the world. Now her glass was 3/4 full instead of mostly empty. And so that just changed the whole paradigm. So there are those types of miracles that can be found. And for those that are really into this stuff, a lot of this is the Lyme pathogens, or the bugs associated with that. There's bacteria, there's viruses, and there's parasites that can potentially cause that. But that compromises the liver's ability or the body's ability to handle stress appropriately. So a lot of those people are going to be, diagnosed, anxious and OCD, obsessive compulsive, and that sort of stuff first before it's ever really diagnosed or determined what's going on there. So if somebody listening has that chronic joint pain somewhere, a knee or ankle or wrist or that sort of stuff, and they've got that threshold type high anxiety stuff, look at these bugs and strengthen the immune system to help the body break down that cortisol and that chronic stress. So that's, one side of it. Sometimes it's the bug, and we can blame the bug, and it's not work and that sort of stuff, that we correct the way the body works, and then they can tolerate more. We can see the world in a more healthy way. If it's just like me, and probably you, overdriven and trying to change the world and today, then we need to balance life, right? We need to go do those long, steady aerobic type runs or bike rides. That's going to help mitigate that chronic stress potentially. That's going to help us use insulin and stabilize blood sugar better. Cortisol, it causes the cells to not use insulin, not use carbs as well. So we need to balance that so that we can have good, healthy metabolism and be our best. One of my favorite examples of this is again, being an overtrainer, a fitness exercise junkie. Early on, about the time I had the second kid, I'm like, this is selfish of me to be working out, doing this so much. So I kind of started backing it down, trying to be there to be a dad and that sort of stuff. After about 2 months, I realized I wasn't there anyway, right? If I wasn't getting some kind of exercise in, I'd basically go home, sit on the couch and could care less what the kids were doing. It's like, just give me the remote. I got nothing for you. So, I try to be a good dad, so to speak, and get the exercise in when my kids are all older now. And so it's a lot easier to do it when they're, occupied, but try to get the exercise in a way that in a time that's not going to compromise the time that I would have with them. But at least when I get the exercise, I'm there for them and I'm showing up. Right. And so it's going to be the same thing at work, right? When we're getting our fitness in, we're doing what we need to do. We're going to show up. We're going to be 100% present. I mean, I think it's an easy leap to say that we're twice as effective when we're training properly and managing our life appropriately. Think of the person that's pulling the all-nighter because they've got a report due or a sales pitch due tomorrow. They're not showing up at their best, unfortunately, right? So that's where balance and moderation in life helps us show up our best to close the deal, to be the best husband and spouse and parent, because we've got the brain chemistry working as it should. We're handling our stress appropriately. It's so easy in this modern world to load up on stimulants, right? Or Nicorette gum or something else and just push the envelope and basically run us on overdrive. And that's going to catch up. It's going to show up as all these overtraining symptoms. It's going to create leaky guts, a whole nother subject. But, chronic cortisol causes the intestinal, let's go to that. The intestinal lining gets permeable under this chronic stress. So chronic cortisol, the stress hormone, is one of the main triggers that sets up what we call leaky gut. And that's going to make us more sensitive to virtually anything. Again, done this many times in my life. One of the bike races I do is a 8-hour, takes me, at least 6, typically 8 hours to do this one mountain bike race. And so show up, a race, still trying to work and do all my stuff, but be in prime shape for that. And we all know never change what you do or eat on race day, right? So I had the foods, the snacks that worked for me that I'd been using for the months leading up to that, have my pocket all loaded up with enough to try to get me through this 8-hour race. Within an hour of that race, I chomped on this power snack that I was eating, and my back would spasmed almost immediately. I'm like, oh no, I'm 1 hour into it. I got 7 more hours, and now I can't eat what I've got, in my pocket. And so I'm like, I'm going to have to suck it up and get whatever they have at the next rest stop. Next rest stop, they literally had a pig on the rotisserie that had pulled pork donuts. I'm like, I'm not for pig. Pork shuts down my immune system. I'm like, no way I'm doing either of those. So I basically starved. And then from there was a 10-mile hill climb right after that. And I was just starting to suck wind because I had no food. So what happens there again was that chronic cortisol. I was training hard, working hard, now into the race and doing caffeine to be stimulated for the race. That created a leaky gut. So food that normally would work for me now becomes an irritant and created spasms in my low back. I mean, I've had it happen with water when I was, working till 3:00 in the morning trying to move my office and some crazy stuff like that. I'd react to stinking water. So, I mean, it's crazy what can happen when we have this chronic stress, when we're overtraining and open the door, if you will, to Pandora's box, to chronic inflammation. That is the foundation of what arthritis is ultimately.
I mean, that's such a great example, again, just in for so many of the folks that are going to listen to this episode, and for so many people that I talk to on a daily basis, nutrition is a big thing, specifically on a race day, right? And it brings us, I mean, that's a perfect example of like how stress is represented, back to kind of just my curiosity and interest in you leaning into that question is, we try to address, we're like, oh, my nutrition strategy is not working. Is it 60 grams of carbohydrates or 70 grams, or am I drinking 22 ounces of fluid? What's the electrolyte salt, right? And those are all important things. But I mean, that's just a great example. Like, you had that dialed, and the stress is actually the thing that made that not work. Right. And so my point is that we can, it is important, and we can often, when we don't take it seriously or don't recognize the role that plays in our buildup from a physical perspective, we can address the wrong thing, right? And I can't tell you, I mean, who knows how many people, I'm sure that's happened to folks that I work with, and me as well. I mean, I've had similar experiences. I wasn't as well versed in real time to know if that was happening as you are, but yeah, certainly, like, come in, I describe it like, you're coming in hot, right? Like, you got a million things, you sleep a couple hours, wake up, go to the training ride or meet, to do the big thing. And you're like, well, I don't know, I'm just going to push through. And, and you're like, oh, this is brutal, right? Your body, of course, doesn't respond like you wanted to. And, it's stress, right? We brought all that experience and then expect our bodies to perform. And of course, lo and behold, it doesn't always go the way we planned. And I do want to talk about, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about the headache side of things. We've been talking about a lot of different aspects, which I'm massively appreciative of, because it's just so like enlightening for me to think about all these real experiences I've had in my own life and working with athletes and clients. But I know you have the HEAD program that is designed to address headaches. I'd love for you to just take a second to outline what that is. And I know this is a big part of your work. And so I feel like I would be remiss if we didn't lean into headaches a little bit more. And it's something that is just massively, it's a chronic issue for so many people. So walk us through what it looks like to, put headaches to bed, so to speak, with your approach and what that can look like.
Thank you for that opportunity. Ultimately, it comes down to every headache fits into one of 7 different patterns. And so there's a right-sided headache typically is a gallbladder issue. Left-sided headache is going to be a stomach issue. Frontal headache, which we'll lean into a little bit more again, is that chronic cortisol, the stress type of a hormone headache. Ultimately, what happens is that cortisol, let's talk about that for a second. Chronic cortisol suppresses the immune system, shuts down digestion, and shuts down detoxification, right? So when we're into that chronic stress, the immune system doesn't work. Ultimately, the body's going to force us to take a break, right? We keep kind of, like you said, lean into, how'd you put it? Burning the candle, basically. Term you used. But running on empty. Ultimately, eventually the immune system. That's when a person gets sick, right? Because we shut down the immune system, overtraining. Right? How many times people get sick after, their big race. So the immune system shuts down and then forces us to rest. And if we don't listen and take appropriate measure. So detoxification again shuts down as well. Digestion shuts down. So in that chronic cortisol, that suppresses the stomach, compromises the stomach linings. That's the stage, if you will, for ulcers. That's the paradigm for the frontal headache. So then from there, ladies, the bitemporal headache, that's going to be hormones, typically estrogen metabolism kind of concerns. So that's equal on both sides. Typically going to be the type of headache that gets worse during ovulation or during menstruation, that sort of stuff. The other common popular one is what's commonly called the tension headache, or the pain in the back of the head. Those types of headaches have to do with thyroid function, typically under-functioning thyroid, and its activation of enzymes. So we look at toxic metals, we look at tyrosine or iodine, things that are going to help the thyroid function better to get rid of those tension headaches in the back of the head. The little bit less common one is what I call the cyclops headache, kind of like that third eye pattern. That's the referred pain from the pituitary gland, the little gland that regulates hormones. That's kind of air traffic control for hormones, if you will. It's where growth for us as athletes, that's where growth hormone comes from. So that's going to help us recover while we sleep after we train our brains out during the day, or overwork. We need to recover, or kids need that growth hormone to reach their maximum potential. Women need the pituitary also secretes oxytocin to get labor started. So those are all issues that are pituitary dependent. Speaking of, one of the things that can compromise the way that pituitary functions is Pitocin. So if a gal's trying to get labor started, then that could compromise the way the pituitary works, and then now they've got that third eye cyclops type of a headache. So that's one. And then the final one is that I've mentioned a few times is the whole headband type of a headache. And so that's typically a colon issue. So if we do think something that compromises the way the colon functions, then we end up with that feeling like a tight headband. So those are the 7 patterns that are laid out in the book. With some of the typical dietary triggers. Actually, what I'm working on right now is supplements, trying to simplify it for people. So as the book gets out and gets popular, the book, it's on Amazon right now. It's listed as pre-launch. The date's going to get pushed a little bit. The production team's working on the cover design and all that sort of stuff right now. Probably be mid-November that'll be officially available in paperback and all that. So it's available there. But the headaches are laid out with the typical food triggers, potential emotions, and potential supplements. So I'm working on supplement lines so that or products so that somebody can say, I have a right-sided headache. Hey, take these, this 1, 2, 3 supplements, and that's 90% chance that those headaches will go away. Or if you have the frontal, overtraining, this kind of audience, the frontal headaches that a lot of those are going to deal with when they push it too hard. Take this pack with ashwagandha and some, magnesium, some of these things that are going to help mitigate a frontal headache. So trying to make it easy for people to help, trying to empower ultimately people, to solve these issues. Unfortunately, a lot of what's available in healthcare doesn't get to the core, right? It just leaves us dismayed like I was as a kid. So I'm trying to help empower people to make appropriate change. Mm-hmm.
That's incredible. Well, Dr. V, I'm grateful for your time. This was incredible. There's so much to unpack here, but I appreciate you giving, real actionable guidance and real world, application of the work that you do. I think that, this is going to be just massively impactful. Like you said, the book comes out on Amazon in a month or so. The book is called The Headache Advantage. I had the opportunity to read some of it pre-launch, and it is really, really cool, massively insightful. I think what you put together is really something that people can take action on. It's not a super heavy lift like we talked about. So I can't encourage people enough when it is out and available to grab a copy, because it is really, really cool stuff that I think is going to be, like you said, it's going to really empower people to make some positive changes and to actually, take some control over the chronic pain that they're dealing with. So thanks so much, Dr. V. I'm grateful for your time, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Taylor, thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Appreciate it.